Okay, everybody, we've started the recording and ready to start here this afternoon. We want to welcome you all aboard to our presentation this afternoon. Our presenter is Glenn Muske. Glenn is the Rural and Agribusiness Enterprise Development Specialist for North Dakota State University. In that role, he helps prospective startup and existing business owners with everything from idea development to growing and operating that business. As part of the NDSU Extension Service, Glenn's located at the NDSU Extension Center for Community Vitality with offices in Bismarck. I should have mentioned off the top, I'm Rick Atterberry. I'm the chair of Eden. And as we go along today, if you have questions, please type them in the chat box. I will relay those to Glenn as we go along today. So with that, I'll advance on and turn it over to Glenn.
Good afternoon and welcome as we talk about businesses and disasters and continuity, as you'll hear we talk about later on. This was a slide taken by Rick and colleagues through Eden of a business that Rick was aware of that obviously had a disaster. We think about disasters, I mean, they're just scary. They can come in multiple ways. And what does it mean for our business owners? Many times business owners aren't ready for it. They haven't thought about it. And all of a sudden this disaster hits and they're not ready to respond to that disaster. And so some of the materials we'll talk about at the end are prepared to help the business owner handle that disaster and be able to continue without struggling. I mean, we want them to survive, but we also want to ease their pain as much as we can and to avoid the struggle. It's more, though, than just having a plan. I just found this cartoon, you know, what are the odds? And we think about disasters and worry about them or not worry about them, but quite often for business owners, when I talk to them, they will have their idea of disasters is something major, or they do something and they put a plan together and it sits on the shelf. We don't go back and we don't think about the plan, we don't update the plan, and so when the time comes to ever need it, if they can find it, they're hard-pressed. So today, what we want to talk about is business disasters, and I'm going to give you a little bit about what we know from the research, and then we want to talk about the issue of disaster or disruption, and we're going to answer the so what question, going to talk about being prepared, fitting in the family, and resources. And I'll tell you more on those as we go along. So let's get started. Why plan? You've all seen the statistics, heard the statistics. According to the SBA, 40 to 60% of small businesses fail after a major emergency. And you can read these, but look at that, 80 to 90% may fail within 5 years. It isn't just the day of the disaster, it is down the road. However, when we talk about why do businesses close, I like the last statistic. As you see way at the bottom, the most common is blizzard, ice storms, or extreme cold. It's not the fires. It's not the hurricanes. It's not the tornadoes, although those certainly will make the paper. But, and the East Coast this last winter had a lot of those days. And this is the National Federation of Independent Business Owners found that 30% of operating businesses have been closed 24 hours or more in the last 3 years. That's 3 years, just 3 years of data that they found that. And so the chances are much greater than what people think, because we usually think of the major disasters and they're not quite as common. There are tools you can go out and look at how many disasters might I face, and this is just one tool that sits out there. But look at the list of disasters. Again, we have avalanches, dam failures, droughts, all the biggies. all the biggies. The number of years in the record, how many is, what are my chances? So if you really as a business owner want to know, or as somebody who works with business owners want to know, what are my chances, you have these kind of tools available to help you figure it out. There is another, we call it the Sheldus data set, and this talks about how much loss was there. And you can see here severe weather is the largest contributor to loss for small businesses, with landslides and avalanches being second. Now, I probably could have asked people to guess what is the most likely cause. You might have gotten the severe weather. I doubt if many of us would have thought of landslides and avalanches, unless you live in those type of areas, would be the second largest contributor to loss. However, remember, that's not number of occurrences, it's what causes the most loss. Drought and heat, a very small amount of loss in this data set. We've used this data set for some of the work that we're involved with family businesses, and have found it's useful, but always remember, what's going on here, what are the questions they're asking. A disaster is a non-routine event that exceeds the capacity of the affected area to respond to it. And then it goes on in such a way as to save lives, etc. This is taken from Pierce, written in 2000, and it's probably one of the better definitions that I've found, because it simply defines it as a non-routine event. That definition allows us to explore disasters in a somewhat broader picture, because while the odds of having some of these smaller events or larger events happen are small, the odds of having a small little glitch are fairly large for a business. As we sometimes think about 1 in 3 are your chances that you're going to have something happen on a yearly basis that's going to cause you to have to shut the doors for at least a while. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a store today when the power goes out. Now, luckily that doesn't happen very often, but business comes to a screeching halt. And if you can get out of the doors, they certainly can't check you out or anything. Well, that's a disaster for a business in many ways. Well, what do we know? We know a little bit that marginally surviving businesses were less likely to recover, meaning businesses that were just creeping by were less likely to recover. Probably makes sense. Businesses who were in better shape financially pre-disaster were less likely to have recovered more than 5 years. So that's an interesting little finding. Disasters can accelerate trends. Probably makes sense. Small businesses are at a disadvantage. That's sort of one of the reasons why I'm in it and why I work so hard with business owners, because they are at a disadvantage. And in many ways, they're at a disadvantage. So they need to think about how can they best prepare their business for this disaster. Cyclical industries take longer to recover. Certain industries thrive after disaster. Not everybody suffers. Construction does great. Manufacturing does great. Hospitality, does great or can do great. Now, if they're not prepared for it to take advantage of those situations, they aren't necessarily going to thrive. But it does create an opportunity for certain businesses to do very well. What else do we know? If you've had, past hazard exposure, if you have them a lot, you're in better shape. The more times it happens, though, to a single firm, now this is sort of contrary research has found that the more times the business was hit, the less likely it was to recover. History gives it experience, but it costs money every time. So you have to take both of those. So what we have is some literature, and you'd have to read the total thing to, try to figure out the exact specifics of what's going on here. But it can go both ways. Disasters, when they occur frequently, people manage them as if they are routine. And once it becomes routine, it's no longer considered a disaster. I mean, in the sense that we're looking at those non-routine events. And if it happens enough, we just roll with the punches then at that point in time. Floods in the Red River Valley of North Dakota, Minnesota. I hate to say they're routine, but the city of Fargo-Moorhead, which I most used to or hear the most about and stuff, it's a big fight, but they've got it down to a science, in a sense. They know exactly what they're going to do, who's going to do what, and they can pull out the book and go. My city, Bismarck, had a flood recently. We don't typically have that. We have a big dam up the river that's supposed to stop that. Well, it didn't in this case, and we didn't know, but luckily the people from Fargo were able to come over and help us. And right there is one tip that business owners need to think about, is who's already been through these type of things. Again, more information. This is the recovery of a particular firm, depending upon how the neighborhoods. So it's not only the business, but it's the neighborhood, it's the infrastructure, it's the total community that can help or hurt businesses in their response to a disaster. And then economically vulnerable communities has some influence, but notice that in some ways we found that they're more likely to survive with the disaster. And this is probably, just more and more statistics. You'll have access to these slides, but it just shows that there is research going on about it, and we can find some idea of the things that are happening. And again, economically vulnerable communities help lead towards survival. That's something we got to struggle with, scratch our heads a little bit to come out with an answer of why that may be happening. Now, here's where we start getting into this family issue, and that's why you saw that on the early slide. We'll introduce it now. We'll talk more about it later. But notice that survival depends somewhat on the ability of the household to shift money over to the business. In many small businesses, that interchange of dollars, of resources, of time just goes back and forth, often unseen, unrecorded, and that is key to survival from a disaster. Again, family leadership, although that was showed to be negative, and the stress indicator, we would expect that to be negative. Those big things that happen are negatively related to that. But let's get to the meat of this whole thing. As nice statistics, they help us, they give us some information. The issue, though, is not the disaster. It's what it does to the business in the short term and in the long term, from it being surviving, succeeding, and growing. I mean, those are the issues. We want our businesses to continue, and in order to do that, it has been shown enough times that being prepared and understanding who you can turn to and where you can get resources ahead of time will help you think continuity, and that's what it's all about. So with that, with disruption in mind, my train of thought when I work with business owners is I don't use the word disaster if I can avoid it. It's disruption, because the disruption can be the little things and are more likely to be the little things. And I found this good picture of a cup of coffee on the keyboard. That little event could take a business under. Surprisingly, now most of the time you can recover, but there have been documented cases where a simple thing like that, if it were, say, your financial computer and the records are lost and you haven't been doing backups and on and on and on and on, that could be just devastating. It could be big, it could be small. It doesn't have to be something physical, though. How about the health of a key employee or an owner? Now, we don't think of those as disasters, but there's certainly disruptions, and there's certainly things that you as the owner should be thinking about, because your disaster plan really needs to be a disruption plan. What might I do? Key equipment. Delivery van breaks down. Driver doesn't show. Now, again, we think those are day-to-day, and maybe it happens often enough. I hope if you're in business, that your driver is showing up often enough that it isn't an issue. But a food recall, a computer virus, a disruption can be something positive. It need not necessarily be a negative event, is this whole list here. We in Western North Dakota are experiencing just that right now. We call it the Bakken oil boom. And next week, I'm going to be out talking to small business owners and family business owners, asking them, how is this what is considered, and it is a huge economic windfall for the state of North Dakota, how is this impacting your business? Two of the business owners I called, ex-business owners, to simply participate in the survey, the discussions we're going to have with them, said no, they didn't want to talk to me. And they were very negative that this is what took them out of business. So how can these things, and so don't think of your disaster plan or a disaster plan as simply helping you in the huge, like we saw that first picture, this tornado went through. These plans can also be very beneficial for the small issues as well as the big. And we need to, the business owners are more likely to experience them, and we need to get them thinking in those directions. The biggest problem, loss of sales, loss of customers. That's where 62%, as best we can quantify this, of the losses for a business are going to happen right there, is we lose revenue. More importantly, we lose customers. We can lose revenue on a one-time sale and probably survive. But if that customer walks away and you haven't been offering them or forming a relationship that says, I'll come back when you're back in business, but it's like, yeah, you were always the closest base, so I came here, but, I left your business now and I'm going somewhere else. And they smile when I walk in the door. Well, that customer, not being a long-term customer, can be damaging. Uninsured losses, it's not as big as what we think it might be. And there's also, though, the loss of suppliers. About 40% of businesses have an emergency preparedness plan. It's often related to size and past experience. However, they vary extensively. Most of them will discuss the major disasters. Few will get down into the weeds and think about some of the smaller issues, such as we have a lot of power outages, or, the weather's bad, or no. Remember, it's a disruption. And so that's what they need to think about. And there's no information in those plans about how recently ago they were updated. And many of the plans haven't thought about alternatives. They may think about the big things. Well, we need insurance. We need to back up our data. But I worked with one city, or we talked to the city manager of a major city, and it wasn't a mid-sized city, I guess I'd say, probably about 100,000 in population. And they actually went out and surveyed business owners to see what excess capacity they had in terms of cold storage, freezer storage, trucking systems, etc., that they would be willing to share should a disaster or some type of disruption hit their community. And that gets into that infrastructure part. It's not just you. You may not be affected at all. I mean, a storm may go through, but it's going to impact your whole community. So are you willing to pitch in as a business and help others? Just like you're hoping that, but you've got to figure that out ahead of time. Instead of once the event happens, it's too late to go on. The impacts, it uses up your resources. Money, there isn't enough money, but we can get more of that. Time, sorry, once used, it's gone. Goodwill, once used, it's really gone. And, time you can't get more of. Goodwill you can, but it takes a long time to get there. And it's not only the business. We have to think about the family. And we've done some work, and others have too, looking at this intermingling of time and money. And small businesses, family businesses, it is not uncommon to see a great deal of intermingling of time and money between the business owner and the household owner, or even just between those two systems and stuff. It also happens, though, within the community. The smaller the community, the greater the interdependence that you have. And the greater although when a small community gets hit, they all pull together in that. But what resources do they have? They just have fewer resources. So what are your options? You can just accept it. Things are going to happen, and we'll figure it out when we get there. You can insure for it, and that's certainly something you better have in your disaster planning, in your continuity strategy. You can plan for some strategies, or you can you also come up with some resources to cushion, which is again the insurance, the planning, the community, the family. It's finding, like I said, who might have freezer space, where could I get extra helpers, where could I rent equipment. The list goes on and on and on. But all those key pieces you need to have figured out ahead of time, thought about where you might alternatively access them, or who could help you out as the small business owner or large business owner works to go forward. And it's who is the small business owner? It's my audience tends to be the very small, the micro business owner more likely, but we're talking about all sizes of businesses. Into small could be on the street definition, it's 500 employees, so any of these could be affected by it. So, preparedness enhances. We know from talking to business owners that we know that it can help them with business disruption. It can help them recover from the losses that go with it, market share, and damages. The one thing it does, or another thing it does though, is allows you to sleep at night. The business security. Having things in place should give you a little bit of comfort, a little bit of an idea that, if something happens, I've done everything I could, or most everything anyway. Having that plan and talking to your customers, your vendors, your supply chain, the community, also gives them some confidence that you're going to be there. And so it becomes, as you can give them confidence that you're doing everything you can, they're likely to respond and say, hey, we'll step up to the plate and do everything that we can do for the event also, be it that major one or that little, 24 hours, the power goes out situation. Families and businesses. As I said, I'm a family business. That's been a large part of my research work, is to look at the family businesses. Most of them are small businesses, and if you don't know it, then you don't know businesses, that those two are just so intertwined. It's hard sometimes to tear them apart. Healthy families combined with healthy businesses are more likely to survive, and they're more likely to just succeed after a natural disaster. And again, in that work, it was the major disasters that we were talking about. Remember that families and businesses, you have, as an owner, you have the question for yourself, where do you respond first? And as an owner, where do you want your employees, your key suppliers, responding first? If I lived for a long time in Oklahoma, I've watched more Oklahoma get devastated more times than I want to count. And you always have to think, and I've talked to a lot of business owners in there who, that day, the last time when more of the tornadoes went through more Oklahoma and grade schools got hit, what's more important to your employees? Is it you? Is it your business? It could be devastated, but where do you think those family members are going to think first? So you always got to keep that family issues sort of got to be mulling in your mind. And when you write your disaster plan and think about continuity planning and preparedness, you need to be thinking about the family side of the issue also, because it is a significant issue. And the larger the business, the less of an impact it has. But even in the largest businesses, the major corporations, they were significantly impacted by, large events, but even sometimes the small events too. This is our work, and I just put that up there, that the interest, and I see the box got shifted a little bit here. We're talking about this area, oh, my green pointer, this area right in here, which is the interchange between the family and the business aspect that we want to consider. And you, as you prepare as an owner, or as you're working with owners, need to make sure that they're thinking about a little bit about both sides of the issue. Okay, so how important is the family? These are the things that they can help you with. Finances, we've already talked about that. Obviously, time. Smaller the business, the more likely we are to turn to family members to pitch in when needed. And I don't know if any of you have been on, we include ag in this. What happens when things get tough? When the family members got called in. And it's also leadership. They provide leadership for the issues. So, resources for moving forward. You're not in this alone. That's the great thing, is that you don't have to start a plan like there's nothing out there. There's some great resources out there. And I and Rick are going to go through some of those now as we talk about some of the things that you have. And I'm going to touch on them, and I think Rick's going to give a little bit more detail on them. But these are just some of the Eden courses. And I've listed more of the courses than just the bottom two that I highlighted. I've listed some of the other courses that just can influence a business that you may want to also be aware of and using as you prepare this structure to be set up to handle questions in the future. And this is one, a ready business, preparing a disaster business plan. Great information. You can, full course. It's got a video. It's got materials. It's got tip sheets. It's got forms to fill out to work with business owners in that whole process. If you haven't taken it, you can just get to it online through Eden. Great information. And you can also, if you're an educator, use it as an educational program with participants. And that's sort of the screenshot I got here is if you're working with participants, I use a significant part of the course in a couple trainings I've done. And at times I just pull out bits and pieces of it because it's really helpful. And it's nice that these were the professionals that have helped put this together to understand some of the issues and understand some of the questions to help me out as an educator. As I said, money is money, and so even on the personal finance side, their money management in times of disaster materials could be useful to you because you got to understand the family side, but also some of the tools that they have in their toolkit would also be helpful to you as a small business owner. And so this would be another one. And you see the websites where you can go to get to these just in bold there across the screen. The Red Cross has a very good website and talks about your ready rating and stuff where you can take your assessment. And that's just another resource that's available out there to you that has been screened and thought by professional educators to have good, solid, research-based information. It will happen. It's not going to go away. You have a 1 in 3 chance that your business will experience a disaster in a 5-year period. Actually, the odds are probably higher than that, depending upon how you define disaster. If we go to a disruption, it certainly climbs higher than that. We know for a fact that preparedness helps. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, but it does help. But how do you help the business owner see that, and not only see that, but take the steps necessary to do something about it? A lot of them see it, and it's when they get time, but what can we do to help them make those steps? And you've seen some of the materials. Family support, crucial. Community support, as crucial. Those communities that pull together can do great things for small businesses. Knowing, as I said, some of the assets that a community has, some of the infrastructure, excess capacity that may be sitting there can do great things. I'm trying to think of the town. It escapes me right now when their bank was destroyed. Well, they knew where they could go to bring those services up right away, and it included some of the existing banks already in town, who said, yeah, we'll help you out. We'll start running some of that stuff. Remember, though, it's not just the big disasters, it's the little ones, and the little ones, because they can happen, if you're not doing everything you can to avoid disaster, and we haven't even talked about that as an issue, what steps do you take to avoid having these disruptions happen? There is some cumulative effect, and it gets to be wearing over time. So, how do you prepare? Plan to stay in business. It's a mindset. It's an attitude. It's agreeing that you need to take the time to write your plan and then talk with your people and family. Now, your family of your key employees, of all your employees, about what would happen should we go through some type of disruption or some type of disaster, and then taking the proactive steps to protect your investment. There are things we can do, and there are some things we can't do, or the cost is so prohibitive it is just not within our means to be able to handle some of them. But those are the three primary steps that you as an owner need to think about. So that's a look at businesses and a little bit about what we know about surviving and struggling, the choices that can be made ahead of time in that whole process. And now I would ask if there's any questions. I see my colleague Becky Koch from NDSU had to talk about Fargo floods being routine. Yes, they are, Becky. If you haven't figured it out by now, Becky, I'll have a talk next time I drop through Fargo.
If you have questions for Glenn, go ahead and type them in the chat room, and then I'll repeat them for everybody. We do certainly have time for questions. I've taught Ready Business about almost 30 times now, to a total of about 500 people. And one of the interesting things about that is that it applies equally to small nonprofits and government organizations, including school districts. And when Glenn talks about it's not necessarily a disaster that happens to you, but somewhere in your supply stream, in your transportation network, places like that, I think that's actually more common. And we talk about if you're running a little eBay business out of your home and you have an account set up with UPS and the Teamsters go on strike and you haven't already set up an account with FedEx, you're going to lose some time. And it's as simple as that sometimes. I had a school district where the principal said, this just happened to us. We had a power outage in town. The school's on the edge of town. The school had power, but we only had an account set up at one gas station to put diesel in our buses, and the power was out at that station. It took a while to set up an account at another gas station to fuel those buses. So it's always thinking, ideally, what we teach is 3 deep, to have 3 sources for everything, if you can, so it just kind of snowballs. Wanted to mention that first slide, too, that Glenn showed you with the factory that was destroyed, and it's up there in the corner of the slide right now. That's a company called Parsons Manufacturing. They're in Roanoke, Illinois, which is located northeast of Peoria. And in 2004, what you see is what happened to them. They make parts for Caterpillar. Caterpillar does not wait for their part suppliers to get their act together, no matter what happens. They're very generous, but they require certain preparation, and that's a good thing for Parsons. What Mr. Parsons had, I should tell you, there were 115 people in that building when it was hit by that tornado. And there was no official tornado warning on that tornado from the National Weather Service. It's really not their fault. That particular storm went from 0 to 60, we might say, in a matter of about 4 or 5 minutes. But what Mr. Parsons had done was he had allowed some of his employees to be trained as storm spotters. And when that tornado watch was issued, they went outside and started to scan the skies. He had, because this was a building, as you can kind of tell, it was a steel structure, metal panels on the roof and on the walls for the most part. He had 2 large locker room facilities in there that were reinforced concrete. They survived. That's where the people went. There were 115 people in there. Not a person was scratched. Those storm spotters saw the tornado approaching, sounded the alarm. People went into those shelters. The building was completely destroyed around them, and all of the cars in the parking lot were completely destroyed, and everybody walked away from that. A couple of other things that Glenn alluded to on the insurance side, Parsons had business interruption insurance so that he could continue to pay all of his employees while he was out of business, and there was income being generated. But he very quickly got back up and running in another facility down in East Peoria, actually even closer to Caterpillar, to get some of the manufacturing going again. He'd already backed up all of his business records at a second location, so the business office was up and going. And if there were employees that didn't have anything to do, and once the cleanup was done and the reconstruction started, as long as they continued to check in and do volunteer work in the community, Parsons continued to pay those people. The kicker to the whole story is that while they were operating the business office out of a second location, that second location caught fire. But by then, they had backed up the business records at a third location, and they just kept going. All the challenges they faced, they've rebuilt. They are going great guns up there in Roanoke right now. So they planned ahead. They had those things in place. They reacted quickly and recovered from it. But I think one of the key things is that planning. The other key thing is to realize that the disaster or the disruption, as Glenn said, doesn't have to happen to you. So if you have questions, go ahead and type them in. I wanted to mention some firsthand things too. November 17th, Illinois was hit by, there were about a dozen tornadoes in all. 2 of them were particularly significant. One in our home county right here in Champaign County in a little town called Gifford. And when Glenn talks about the people pitching in and the resilience of the small town, a third of that town was destroyed. It's a town of 1,000 people, and diagonally right across the middle of it, it was destroyed. A couple of businesses were destroyed. They operated from other locations that they had. The community building was destroyed. The water tower is condemned. The bank was on the edge of the disruption, but they were back up and running the next day. But by the time we got there, and I volunteer with the Emergency Management Agency, so we were there with our mobile command unit within about an hour. People were already cleaning up in this small town. It's a unique town, as a lot of rural communities are, where several people in town actually owned end loaders, so they're cleaning up. But Washington, Illinois, which had 1,000 homes destroyed, is my hometown, and that's 2 hours before Gifford was hit, Washington was hit. A couple of fatalities there. But they, in some ways, are having a harder time recovering, the business community. The business community was not, for the most part, not directly affected. There was a restaurant, there was a golf course, a car dealership, kind of a secondary location for a car dealership. But not a lot of other businesses were damaged or destroyed. However, the businesses on the town square, which was beyond where the tornado was, if you're coming over from Peoria, they were fine. But they suffered greatly during that critical Christmas shopping season because, remember, the tornado was November 17th. people in their large market area, because those businesses are largely antique shops and specialty shops, so they rely on people making an effort to get there. They were hurt greatly financially, even though the tornado did not affect them physically at all. People just made assumptions that you couldn't get there or that they had been damaged. And part of what Extension is doing right now with our community and economic development people is trying to help them recover and then make certain that they have a robust organization in place so that they can advertise not only that they're in business now, but if heaven forbid anything like this happens again, that if they are intact, they'll be able to tell that story. So those are just a couple of real world things that I've encountered over the last couple of years.
Well, Rick, I believe you've got some resources to share with people.
Yes, I do. If I move on to this next page here, you will see the Eden main page. And what we have there are the resources that we have. You see across the top, the topics, which are the topics that we're talking a lot about these days, are right there on the main page. The Eden courses, which is the page that Glenn was referring to, news and features, conferences and workshops and such. Eden, the website was designed to support Extension educators around the country. It came to be after the floods of 1993 along the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, the devastating floods that year. 7 states bordering the river realized that they were duplicating efforts in terms of getting information out to people. So as a lesson learned following that, they got together and divided up for what they needed information on, and from that it grew into all the land-grant institutions in all 50 states, plus the 1890 historically black colleges that are part of the land-grant system are involved, and the Sea Grant system is involved. So that's the main page, and what was designed basically for the use of Extension educators, we do not, what we don't do is restrict it. Only some working areas are password protected. Anybody, including the public or other interested people, can get to this site. The companion site is eExtension, which is the public face of Extension on the internet. It's at extension.org, just extension.org. And there is a disaster section, a community of practice on disasters that Eden helps manage, that is part of the eExtension site. So this is where a lot of the information that's public, aimed for the public and written for the public, resides on that eExtension site. It is a pretty robust site, and we take a lot of pride in the work that has been done under the leadership of Virginia Morgan at Auburn to keep that site up and going. Ready.gov is there's a lot of jokes out there about government websites, but Ready.gov, as it has evolved, has become a very robust site to help with a lot of resources for people to assess their risks, to plan for disasters. They have continuity of operations planning materials. Ours, the Ready Business, was originally written in cooperation with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is the operator of the Ready.gov site. There is just a ton of material there, including helping you make your own plan, how to build a kit, the kits that we talk about for you to keep as a go kit or in your shelter area, things to do with the youth to keep them engaged and help them understand what might be going on. And then we operate a Facebook page for Eden. We are active in social media across the platforms, Twitter and Pinterest and Google+. And we invite, if you haven't already, to become a Facebook friend of Eden. A lot of timely information is passed along on virtually a daily basis there. And here we go with our Twitter page, and we tend to post things pretty much at the same time across all of those platforms. And we have some videos here up on our YouTube page and other material up there. And so, and as I mentioned, we're using Pinterest as well. So we encourage you to explore what Eden has to offer, but we also really hope that what you take away is the necessity of planning. The big players, the big corporations, their insurance companies require it. They have risk management operations, and God bless them, they do a pretty good job. But it's 90-some% of businesses in the United States fall into that small and medium category, people who may not be as prepared. So we hope that we can continue to provide resources. If you have any questions, you can contact us at Eden, and we'll do what we can to point you in the right direction, because we can't stop some of these disasters as much as we'd like. We can plan for them, we can mitigate some of the effects of them, but they're going to either happen to us directly or affect us in some other way by our supply chain, our transportation network, just the whole way the business operates today in this just-in-time sort of economy. It doesn't take a lot to knock things for a loop. We saw, for example, the revised figures just this week of a 1% dip in the economic activity in the first quarter of the year because of the weather. Could some of that have been mitigated against? That's a really good question. But it happens constantly, and it'll continue to happen. And there are arguments to be made that it will happen, disasters based on the weather may happen more often in the future. So we hope we haven't scared you, but we hope that we've provided you with some solid information here today. Glenn, any last words?
No, you reinforced and hit several important things that, the disaster may not happen, as you talked about, the weather this last winter, and your comment earlier, it doesn't have to happen in your neighborhood. It could be your key supplier who may be across the country. Transportation, all of those in a way are a disruption to you and your business. So no, you had some great examples, Rick, and there are some great tools out there. We just need to help business owners recognize it and do what they can to prepare themselves if they want to. The issue is survivor struggle.
With that, we'll, unless there is a last comment or question that people want to contribute here, we'll go ahead and thank you all for attending here this afternoon on this Friday, and wish you a good weekend. And as the meteorological summer begins this weekend, I hope you have a good summer. Thanks, everybody.